So today's week 4 of our mean stack course. And so far, we've basically only been working with the N in the mean stack. All we've been working with is node. So this week, we're going to start working with Express, and we're going to use Express for the rest of the course. So we're going to use node and Express, and then I think next week we'll introduce the M, and we'll get into working with MongoDB as well, which is a little bit of a different beast. So Express is I guess I should change this. Express is a middleware. So it basically sits on top of Node, and Express handles a lot of the web server functionality. Node has the HTTP library that we've used so far, where we have the create, server, and listen methods we've been using. We're going to use Express to handle some of that stuff, as well as handling our URLs. Last week, we worked with a little NPM package called Connect. Connect is actually a dependency of Express, so when we're working with Express, it'll look kind of similar to most of the code we wrote last week when we did our little hello, a goodbye, and home site. We'll also get into view templating. So we haven't really looked at the front end at all. We've really just been dealing with the back end. How do we actually create a Node application and run it and just send simple responses? We haven't actually rendered entire views in the browser. So there's different template engines for this. We're going to use one called HBS. There's several different ones. We'll use HBS for a few reasons. One, it's fairly easy to read. Unlike some of the others, it's fairly easy to work with. And then later on, as we transition our application to use an Angular front end, the syntax with Angular and HBS is quite similar. So we don't really have to learn two totally different syntaxes for building our UIs. We'll also try to look today at how we can deploy a Node app to a cloud service. Obviously, we won't use Azure because probably everybody's Azure credits got burned up sometime in about November. So we're going to use a different cloud service that does not involve Azure credits. Yes, lots of smiles with that news. So as I mentioned, Express sits on top of Connect. So when we install Express, we're going to also get Connect being installed because Connect is one of those dependencies. So here's our kind of simple hello world example. We'll try this first. So it's fairly similar to what we did last week with Connect. We're going to need to install Express, create an Express application, and then we can map our root path to this anonymous function that will just send a hello world response. And our app will listen for events on port 3000. And there was our listen question right out of the quiz. The two things I was looking for is listen starts the server and listens or checks for HTTP request events. It's listening for new requests coming in. So we'll try this as our kind of first example. So Express basically deals with three primary objects. So the application as a whole, and then the HTTP requests and the HTTP responses. So we'll listen for the requests, and then we have to tell Express, what do we do? What kind of response comes into every request? Do we send a view back to the browser? Do we send a JSON response only? Do we send an error? What does that response look like? We can skip over that. And we'll also look a bit at how Express handles HTTP verbs. So these are the same HTTP methods that we kind of worked with last semester when we built REST APIs with ASP.NET Core, right? So we used the HTTP methods like get, post, put, and delete. So Express handles those same methods, which means it's really easy to write an API with this, because Express already understands get, post, put, and delete. And Express and Node are already working with all our information is in JSON. So super easy if we want to build an API with this, where there is no user interface. So the link to those slides are here. That's this intro to JS. And Bradley, you raised a good point last week that it's not clear those are the slides. So I'll put that in the heading so you know this is the slide deck if you want to refer to them later. So that's this item here in lesson 4. This simple slide deck is here. So we'll have a quick look at the Express.js site. It's fairly simple. which is good because they make it fairly easy to get started. So they tell us how to install it, which we will want to do. And we're going to want to install Express globally because we're going to use it in any project we do in a lab, in an assignment, in anything we do in class. So we'll want it as a global install. They've got a really simple, couple really simple examples we can have a look at. So this is the same example I had in my slide, just your very basic, most basic hello world example, where we'll include Express, we'll create an object, and we'll just map our route path that will print a hello world response, and we'll listen for events. The next thing we'll do, so I'll just kind of show you where we're going, and then we'll do them. So here's how Express would handle, for example, if we wanted to build an API, we could handle get, post, put, and delete methods, and each one of these we specify the path. So we'll kind of work with basic Express first, and then the rest of the time, we're going to work with this tool, which is the Express scaffolding tool. It's called the Express generator. So the Express generator will build an entire working site in much the same way that the Visual Studio templates do when we say we want to create a new web application. Although the Express generator is a bit lighter. It doesn't give us any CSS. It doesn't give us jQuery. It basically just sets up a few folders for us, creates a really simple homepage that's functional. So think of it like the Visual Studio scaffolding, but a mini or a light version of it. And primarily, this is what we're going to use the rest of the semester. Whenever we build an application or an assignment, we'll scaffold out the structure or the shell of it with the Express generator. Okay, so I'm going to give you another lab to do at home basically just setting up a simple site with the generator. Doesn't take very long. It's pretty simple to use. And it's a little more flexible than the Visual Studio version. So we'll kind of go through all three of these samples. So the first thing that I'll do is create a new folder for today. So I'll go into my node folder. I'll make a new folder for today and open it up in WebStorm. So I want to go to my command prompt and I want to install Express globally so we can use Express wherever we want it. So open up the command prompt, or if you're in WebStorm, easy thing, just pop open your terminal, and we will do a global install of Express. Doesn't take very long. And once this is done, I'm going to create a new JavaScript file, which I'll call server.js. The name isn't really important. You can call it the file whatever you like. So there's the 4 things we're doing. We need 5 lines of code to do this. So we'll just sort of follow the official docs hello world example. So what would we do on line 2? This was one of the questions. This was, I think, the first question in the quiz. If we want to include the library or the module. Yep. And what would go before that? Yeah. Or you could use letter var. If we're going to use const, which we can, I think they do in their example, it's the node coding convention that constants are declared in all capitals. You don't have to, but that's from our little unofficial node style guide we looked at last week. So if we want to create a new object, we just create a variable. I'll call it app because that's what it will commonly be called in the documentation. We're creating a new instance of an express object. So when our express application receives a GET request at the root path, we'll handle write our callback function, our asynchronous function. So we'll send an HTTP response. We'll listen on port 3000. And we can also log a message. So this should allow us to run a simple website. If we go to localhost 3000 in the browser, we'll get a hello world message. So we can try it out. We may want to change it. So maybe we will want to start this site using NodeMon, which will monitor for changes in case we add anything. Our server will do an auto restart as soon as changes get saved. So in my terminal, if I run NodeMon, hopefully it'll say our node site is starting, and it should print the message from line 13, express running on port 3000. And then we can see in the browser what we get. Oh. We're going to run the server file because it doesn't know which file to load. Okay. We couldn't find express. Of course it is. I declared my constant here. Thank you. We'll try again. Okay, so running on port 3000. And now if we hit that URL, it returns our response in the root path. Because we're running a GET request. If I go anywhere other than the root, we get the same cannot get error we got last week when we tried URL paths that were not being mapped. Right? And is your constant and your variable here exactly the same? And you installed Express globally? Okay. Okay, there's a few things we can try in that case. First thing you can try is you can install Express locally. So you can do an npm iExpress without the -g flag. So that will actually create a local node modules folder with Express inside. Dustin? It does have curly brackets. It's actually not, no, it's just sending plain text. I could send JSON. So if I wanted to, we could. So it'll allow me to do this. So here, Dustin, we can evaluate what, so now I'll send JSON instead. And my part, because I have a little JSON extension in my browser, it already knows how to parse it as JSON if I say raw. So we can actually send either, it doesn't care. So if we want, if this method is going to be part of a REST API, we'd return a response like this. And we can just return the object. But that's one of the great things about this. There's no serializing. We don't have to say, stringify it to or from JSON. You want to send JSON? Just go right ahead. It can already understand that. I'll maybe put this version as a comment. A good question. And within our HTML, within our response, if we want it again, we can include HTML wrapping. So if we wanted this in a, for example, heading tag, that should work too. So we can send. So we could set, Dustin, to come back to your question, in the response header, if we want, you could set the content type. You could set the content type to HTML, JSON, or plain text, but it's going to allow you to do any of them. This is this is just the code hinting from WebStorm. This is actually why I like WebStorm, but yes, it's not designed to confuse you. So our listen will run here, print our log, and we can send some kind of response. So that fixed your problem when you installed it? Okay. It's no big deal to install locally. Later on, we're going to use the Express generator anyway, and Express generator installs Express locally for us. So there's kind of one example. What I want to do now is rewrite the example we did last week, where we basically had 3 different pages. We had an index page, we had a hello page, and we had a goodbye page. And we used connect last week to map each URL to the proper response. So we'll do the same thing today, but we'll use this express pattern instead. And then we'll try it with the generator. There's one other thing I just want to show in terms of what the JSON. Dustin, this is an interesting question that you raised. So let's look here. When we're actually working with data, all of the data, anything we want to pass from our node backend to the view, we pass all the data as JSON. So on this page, we're doing a query in the database, we fetch a list of data, and then all of these values are sent as a JSON object. So we can pass multiple things from our backend to the UI. And then we would be rendering all of these values, the title, the device list, the user, all these things would get rendered in the UI. So JSON is typically how we'll send data from the database to the UI to be displayed. Are there any other questions about this version so far before we add to it? Okay, so let's change this just a little bit. So instead of mapping the path here directly, we'll rewrite it the way we did yesterday. We'll create a function called index. We'll assign it to this code, and then we'll map the path. Oh, actually, you know what? We don't have to do that. Forget it. We'll keep it like this. So there's our home. We want a second path that we want to map, and that path is going to be /hello. I'm going to change the response here. So here, instead of printing hello world here, we'll print homepage. And we'll print our hello world down on line 17 instead. So when the user goes to the root path, they get homepage. When they go to hello, here's where hello world. So now basically our site can interpret, we have 2 virtual pages, if you like. We don't have any real UI. But this is sort of the equivalent of what we did last week. We can handle 2 types of GET requests, one at the root path and one at the path /hello. So now if we go to the root, it'll say home. And if we go to hello, we will get our hello world response instead. So if we can add one more path, we can add the goodbye path, and now we really have what we had last week. So now we have 3 virtual pages. So we'll have a cannot get at any other path besides the root, hello, or goodbye. So goodbye gives us a message, and anything else will have a cannot get, which is what we would expect. Now, really, we want to actually load pages. We want to load views. We're not just going to write all of our responses, including all the HTML markup, is not going to go into backend files. We're going to have front-end files where we can just pass them dynamic data. So our express methods will actually render views instead. But this is how the backend works. What if I do this? Let's say I change my method here on hello. So it still handles the path /hello, but the method is post, not get. If I go back to the browser and go to localhost 3000/hello, what response would we get back? Okay. Right, it's going to say cannot get. So the path is handled in our Express code, but it only handles a get method. So if I submitted a form to this, it would work. We could actually try. So Postman's helpful for this. So I should get 2 different responses at the same path, depending on which HTTP method I used. We'll just try this out and then we'll take a pause. Postman wants to cooperate. So if I make a post request, boom. If I make a post request, I get my HTTP response back. If I make a get request, we have this cannot get. So not only do we have to map the paths accurately, we have to pick the right methods. And most of the time our method will be get, just load a page. But if they're submitting a form or it's an API, we need to make sure we get the method right. We'll have a cannot get, cannot post error. So this should be get. But this word matters. That actually describes the HTTP method that's being called. Any questions before we take a break? Okay, if there are no questions, let's take a quick break here.